Wells, can you tell me, is there any comfort to be drawn by both sets of parents at this time when the fact that the two girls are actually together?
Yes, I think it enables us to certainly reflect in a positive fashion even at this stage.
Composure they showed under the most inordinate pressure.
You don't look wrong.
There's an area of terrain which is mixed as fields, woodland, tracks, etc. The bodies were discovered at 1 p.m. He reported to local police, including Cambridgeshire officers. We're currently liaising now with the Suffolk officers to obviously do forensic examination, and we're sealed off the scene. Families have been told we've made a discovery, but obviously we can't be sure at this stage exactly what we're dealing with or the identities of those involved.
In early August 2002, 10-year-old best friends Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman walked down the road to grab some sweets from the vending machine at a local sports center. Holly and Jessica then vanished. The desperate search to find the girls would end in tragedy less than 2 weeks later. When the truth came to light, it was revealed that the killer had been right there all along. Welcome back to Cold Case Diaries, where we shed light on mysterious cases from around the world. Today, we'll dive into the case of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman to give you a glimpse into what was then the biggest manhunt the UK had ever seen. But first, if you still haven't subscribed to our channel, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the bell icon below, as it motivates us to create more intriguing content for you. So, without further ado, let's dive right into this mystery. Prior to the events of 2002, Soham, a small market town located near the Suffolk and Cambridgeshire border, was best described as unremarkable. Nothing really ever happened in Soham. With a population of less than 10,000 people and a rural countryside setting, it's easy to see the charm of living a quiet life in Soham. This certainly appealed to the Wells and Chapman families. Holly Marie Wells was born on October 4, 1991, to parents Kevin and Nicola Wells. She had one older brother named Oliver. The Wells family lived down the road from the Chapman family. Their family consisted of parents Sharon and Leslie Chapman, along with their 3 daughters, Rebecca, Allison, and Jessica. Jessica was born on September 1, 1991. She and Holly were the best of friends. After their first meeting in daycare, they became inseparable. The girls then both attended St. Andrew's Primary School. Holly was the quieter of the two, whereas Jessica was more of an extrovert. That's perhaps they got on so well. Holly and Jessica balanced each other. Despite some differences, the girls shared many interests. They loved sports, in particular football. Both were due to take part in a juniors superstar competition at the Ross Piers Sports Complex from August 6th to August 8th. 90-odd children were set to compete in a variety of swimming, football, and cycling. But Holly and Jessica never made it to the competition. And following the events of the weekend before, the entire event was canceled. On Saturday, August 3rd, Holly spent the entire day shopping with her mother and friend Natalie. Her mom bought her a new pair of flared trousers, which Holly was thrilled with. Natalie spent the night at Holly's home, as well as the following morning. Jessica left home at 11:45 a.m. on Sunday, August 4, 2002, and set off for her short walk to Holly's house from her home on Brook Street. It would be the first time the girls had seen each other in 2 weeks, since Jessica had been on holiday for 2 weeks in Minorca. While she was away, Jessica purchased a necklace, especially for Holly, with a pendant letter H, and she was undoubtedly excited to present her best friend with the gift. Holly lived in nearby Red House Gardens, practically just around the corner from the Chapmans. When Jessica arrived, she, Holly, and another friend, Natalie, played computer games and listened to some music for about a half an hour. Natalie then left, and Jessica and Holly continued to chat and catch up in Holly's room. Jessica was loving spending time with her best friend after their time apart, so she called home to her parents and asked if it was okay for her to spend lunch at the Wellses. They agreed, and Holly and Jessica tucked into some egg mayonnaise sandwiches and continued playing. A few more hours passed, but Jessica still hadn't spent enough time with Holly, so she called her parents again and asked if she could stay for dinner. Sharon said that was not a problem, but insisted that Jessica let her know when she was ready to come home so her father could come pick her up. By 3:15 p.m., Holly and Jessica had changed into a pair of Manchester United football shirts. One was Holly's, while the other belonged to her brother. Manchester United was their favorite team, and both girls idolized David Beckham, who was their favorite player. At 5:04 p.m., Holly's mom took a picture of the girls in their matching shirts. They then settled down to eat dinner with their other guests who were over for a barbecue. At around 6:10 p.m., the girls went back to Holly's room. 5 minutes later, they left the house without telling anyone. At 6:30 p.m., the girls were seen by someone who knew them crossing Sand Street. At 8 p.m., roughly 2 hours after they had eaten dinner, Nicola Wells went to her daughter's room to call the girls to say goodbye to the guests. As she peered her head inside the door, she was shocked to see that neither Holly nor Jessica were in the room. This alarmed her immediately, and she called Kevin to help her search the home. When they released, the girls weren't inside. They walked up and down the street to see if they could spot them. Holly's curfew was 8:30 p.m., so Nicola wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt until then. When the girls were still not home at that point, Nicola called Jessica's mom. She was shocked to hear that they, too, were worried about their daughter not being home. The families began to search for the girls before realizing something seriously was wrong. The authorities were notified, and Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman were reported missing at 9:55 p.m. An extensive search was launched by Cambridgeshire Police, with hundreds of officers being put on the case to search for the missing 10-year-olds. House-to-house inquiries were conducted across the town of Soham, trying to find any clues of Holly and Jessica's last whereabouts. This was highly unusual for either of them. This was a small, quiet town, and Holly and Jessica knew about being cautious of strangers and never missed their curfews. Their parents had taught them from a young age not to talk to people they didn't know. The same sentiment was shared by the St. Andrews Primary School head teacher, who told reporters, "The possible danger from strangers is something we have impressed upon the children from an early age." Hundreds of volunteers helped search the local area, while the Cambridgeshire Police released a photograph taken only hours earlier of the girls in their Manchester United shirts. Physical descriptions of Holly and Jessica were also released, along with this image. On Monday, August 5th, the girls' parents attended a press conference to appeal for help in bringing their daughters home. Officers were brought in from neighboring Suffolk and Essex to join Cambridgeshire Police in the search. Despite working through the night, they found no sign of either Jessica or Holly. On August 6th, Manchester United legend David Beckham appealed for the girls to come home. Up until Wednesday, approaching the third day that the girls had been missing, the Cambridgeshire Police hadn't shared a theory of what they believed happened to the girls, instead focusing on appealing for tips and witnesses to come forward. On that day, they revealed the possibility of an abduction was becoming increasingly plausible. That evening, 450 Soham residents gathered for a vigil for Holly and Jessica. Every registered sex offender in Cambridgeshire and neighboring Lincolnshire was questioned in relation to the disappearance. Since the police were now thinking a kidnapping was a strong possibility, this was the most logical thing to do. They didn't neglect to look further across the country, too, with over 200 more sex offenders being questioned about the disappearance, regardless of their distance from Soham. On August 8th, CCTV footage of Holly and Jessica was released. It showed them just minutes before they vanished, arriving at the Ross Piers Sports Center at 6:28 p.m. They then left shortly after, having purchased sweets inside. 2 days later, a reconstruction of the girls' last known movements was aired nationally. Two similar-aged girls from a local drama company were brought in to act as Jessica and Holly, dressing in the same football shirts they had worn. Investigators hoped this would jog the memory of anyone who had spotted them on August 4th or on the following days. Mark Tuck called in a tip, saying that he had seen the girls walking on Sand Street in Soham Town Center at approximately 6:30 p.m. on August 4th. He knew right away it was the missing girls he had seen, as their bright red shirts caught his eye as he drove past. Mark even commented to his wife, Lucy, who was also in the car, "Look, there's two little Beckhams over there." 2 minutes later, Karen Greenwood saw them walking arm in arm down College Street. The final confirmed sighting of Holly and Jessica was along that same road. On August 5th, 28-year-old school caretaker Ian Huntley told investigators that he had briefly spoken to the girls on his doorstep. Huntley, who had lived in Soham for the past year, was in a relationship with one of Holly and Jessica's student teachers, Maxine Carr. Huntley had been outside his home washing his dog, Sadie, when the girls saw him and stopped to ask if Maxine's application to work at their school full-time had been successful. Huntley informed them that it had not been, to which Jessica and Holly replied to tell Maxine that they were sorry to hear that. The girls then continued on down the road, walking along College Street towards a bridge that led to Clay Street. This was the last confirmed sighting. So, who were Maxine Carr and Ian Huntley? Ian Kevin Huntley was born in Grimsley, Lincolnshire, on January 31st, 1974, to parents Linda and Kevin Huntley. He was the oldest of two boys. When Huntley was born, his parents had been living with Linda's parents. When Wayne, their second son, was born in 1975, the Huntleys moved into a property in Immingham. Huntley was a quiet child who was very close to his mother. At school, Huntley was an average learner. He wasn't a very popular child, with many of his classmates viewing him as odd. Bullying became an issue for young Huntley, which resulted in his already average academic performance dropping. Despite moving schools when he was 13 years old, the bullying continued. After Huntley graduated from school, he chose to move straight into the workforce instead of furthering his education. From 1990 to 1996, he worked menial jobs, none of which he held for very long. In June 1994, Huntley began dating 18-year-old Claire Evan, who he met while working at a local Heinz factory. Huntley proposed only 2 months later. The pair married at the Grimsley Register Office on January 28, 1995. This marriage didn't last long, as Huntley showed some concerning behavior in the early days. His volatile temper and abusive tendencies led to Claire deciding to leave. Before she could, though, Huntley tried to fake being ill in an effort to have Claire stay. This didn't work, and the pair separated. Not long after, Claire began dating Huntley's brother, Wayne. In February 1999, Huntley met 22-year-old Maxine Carr in a Grimsby nightclub. Maxine Ann Capp was born in Grimsby, Lincolnshire. on February 6, 1977, to parents Shirley and Alfred Kapp. She was one of two daughters. Maxine grew up in a tumultuous household where her parents frequently argued. Following a particularly bad argument, Shirley kicked her husband out in 1979. She and her daughters then moved to Kelby, a small village in Lincolnshire. Alfred provided no financial support to his daughters and maintained minimal contact with them. Shirley raised her girls with the help of her parents, but the family frequently battled with financial difficulties. Maxine was a quiet child who had few friends. Despite her poor academic results, Maxine always dreamed of being a teacher. In 1993, Maxine finished school and began working alongside her mother at a fish processing plant. Maxine then began studying at Grimsby Institute of Further and Higher Education, where she studied general care. She graduated in 1996. Maxine worked a few more odd jobs, with colleagues finding her distant with few interests or friends. She did frequently mention her dreams of being a teacher, though. For some time, Maxine used her surname Benson. She later changed her surname to Carr, believed to be in an effort to distance herself from her father. Within 4 weeks of Huntley and Maxine meeting, they were living together. Their relationship was turbulent. Huntley was extremely possessive of Maxine and was both emotionally and psychically abusive to her. This led to Maxine often leaving to stay with her mother before Huntley would persuade her to come back. In mid-2001, Huntley heard of a school caretaker vacancy in Soham. She applied and successfully got the job, which began in November 2001. As the search continued, media interest in the case drastically increased. The once quiet town of Soham was crawling with reporters. Sky News' Jeremy Thompson was one of these reports who found himself intertwined with the case. Jeremy wanted to retrace the final known steps of the girls using Huntley's account. In fact, Jeremy ended up interviewing Ian Huntley in the early days of the investigation. Huntley was happy to speak to him and showed his concern about the girls' whereabouts. Huntley told Jeremy that their conversation had been brief, but he could see the girls were happy as Larry. It was later revealed that investigators didn't just take Huntley for his word. On August 5th, the same day he mentioned seeing the girls, Huntley's home was searched by a single officer. Nothing incriminating was found, but the officer noted that there was plenty of washing hanging on the clothesline, despite the fact that it had been raining. It was also apparent that some fairly radical cleaning had been done in the home. Huntley explained this by saying, "Excuse the dining room, we had a flood." Huntley seemed agitated, and the officers made sure to record his findings that day. They would certainly be looking further into him and whether he was able to provide an alibi for his movements on August 4th. When investigators spoke to Maxine Carr, Huntley's girlfriend, she was able to provide him with a solid alibi. She was with him on the evening of August 4th and had been in the bath when Huntley spoke to the girls. While this certainly did give Huntley an alibi, the investigators still hadn't written him off as a suspect. In the days following the disappearance, Huntley found himself becoming the official Soham spokesperson. He spoke to multiple news agencies about the feelings of the small village, commenting on the general shock from the community. Huntley also expressed his wish to go back in time to somehow change the events of that day. If only he had spoken to them for a moment longer, or asked them where they were headed, maybe that could have changed something down the line. Maxine also spoke to reporters in the second week following the girls' disappearance. She reiterated what Huntley had said about seeing the children on his doorstep while she was in the bath. "I only wish we asked them where they were going. If only we knew what we know now, then we could have stopped them or done something about it. Maxine described Holly as the more feminine of the pair, calling Jessica more of a tomboy. She had once lightheartedly teased Jessica for being the only one of her friends to never wear a skirt. Showing her relationship with Maxine, Jessica said she would happily wear a dress if she was one of Maxine's bridesmaids. As she concluded the interview, Maxine showed the reporter a card that Holly had given her on the last day of school. She was just lovely, really lovely, Maxine said. Did you catch that last bit? She was just lovely, Maxine had said. Why was she referring to Holly in the past tense? This stood out to the reporters, who passed on the strange comment to the investigators. While it certainly doesn't mean she was guilty of anything, it was worth noting. That same week, investigators noticed Huntley was looking worse for wear. He had lost significant weight and seemed to not have slept in days. To add to the suspicion, he said to an officer, "You think I've done it? I was the last person to see them," before he began to cry. On August 13th, he was prescribed antidepressants. The desperate search for Holly and Jessica came to a tragic end on August 17th, when 48-year-old gamekeeper Keith Pryor made a horrific discovery. Keith had noticed an unpleasant smell several days earlier and decided to check it out when he returned with friends days later. As he walked along the overgrown verge with his friend, Adrian Lawrence, Keith spotted two bodies in a deep drainage ditch. As Adrian spotted what Keith had seen, he called back to his girlfriend, Helen Sawyer, and told her not to come any closer. The men called the authorities, who were soon on the scene in Suffolk, over 10 miles from Soham. The bodies were in an advanced stage of decomposition and had been partially burned. Despite not being able to visually identify who the victims were, the police believed that they had the bodies of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman. They had died elsewhere before being transported to the site. On August 18th, Cambridgeshire Deputy Chief Constable Keith Halder informed the public that they had found the bodies of the two girls, adding that they were as certain as they possibly could be. 3 days later, DNA confirmed what they suspected. Over 2,000 people attended the public memorial held at Ely Cathedral for Holly and Jessica. Reverend Tim Alban Jones officiated. Would not the best and most lasting memorial to these two lovely girls be a change for the better in how we behave toward each other? Today's service is a small milestone in our shared journey of grief and sorrow. It is our hope that we may perhaps draw a line under one phase of our grieving and begin to look forward. He said, Football games across England held a minute of silence before their games to pay respects to the two football-mad girls whose lives had been ripped from them. Ian Huntley and Maxine Carr were first questioned by police on August 16th, 12 days since they disappeared. The questioning lasted 7 hours, with neither of them asking for legal representation throughout the grueling interrogation. Investigators had found some of Huntley's behavior strange during the questioning. On one instance, he leant up against an officer's car door and asked him how long DNA lasts before degrading. Around this time, he was observed to have these vertical scratches running down his cheek. Huntley blamed this on an altercation with his dog. By the time Huntley and Maxine were being interviewed, police had already uncovered some curious information. While Maxine claimed she was with Huntley during August 4th, giving him an alibi, she had been spotted in Grimsby. Maxine was seen out in the town center on the evening the girls went missing. Grimsby is over 100 miles away from Soham and where Maxine previously lived. Her family still lived in the town. As Maxine and Huntley were kept in separate locations, the authorities began a search of his home and of Soham Village College, where he worked as a caretaker. It was clear that Huntley's home had recently been thoroughly cleaned. Despite this, the authorities managed to recover many items of major importance. One of the biggest discoveries came from Soham Village College. The Manchester shirts the girls were last seen wearing were found cut and charred in a bin at the college. Fibers from these shirts were positively matched to Huntley, his clothing, and from inside his home. On top of that, his fingerprints were found in the bin. On the same day Huntley and Maxine were questioned, Huntley's car was examined. Though it had been thoroughly cleaned, traces of brick dust, chalk, and concrete were found on the tires and around the pedals. These same materials made up the road that led to where the girls had been dumped. A cover from one of the rear seats was missing, and the boot's lining had recently been replaced with a section of carpet from Huntley's home. The discovery of the burnt clothes at Soham Village College was enough for investigators to move forward with an arrest. At 4:30 a.m. on August 17th, both Maxine Carr and Ian Huntley were arrested on suspicion of abduction and murder. Huntley, however, had plans to feign mental difficulties. During his questioning, he appeared confused and detached, even sometimes drooling. Authorities had no choice but to send him for a psychological evaluation. Maxine, facing major charges, quickly decided to tell the officers the truth. She admitted she had lied about her whereabouts on August 4th. She explained her reasoning for this was a frantic phone call from Huntley. Roughly 2 days after the girls went missing, Huntley spoke to Maxine while she was in Grimsby and told her the following. Jessica and Holly entered Huntley's home because Holly was suffering from a nosebleed. Jessica was sitting on the bed while Huntley helped Holly stop the bleeding, and once she was okay, the girls went on their way. Huntley was worried about being falsely accused of their murder, so he needed Maxine to give him an alibi. During her confession, Maxine was confronted with the evidence that linked Huntley to the murders of Holly and Jessica. "No, it can't have been. It can't have been. He hasn't done it," was her reaction. For some time after this, Maxine maintained she believed Huntley was innocent. By August 20th, the investigators had sufficient evidence to charge Ian Huntley with 2 counts of murder. When these charges were made, Huntley was in observation at Rampton Secure Hospital in Nottinghamshire. Maxine was charged with attempting to pervert the course of justice on the same day. While she was kept in Holloway Prison, Maxine often asked about Huntley's well-being and wrote letters professing her love for him. It wasn't until December of 2002 that Maxine stopped all communication with Huntley. Huntley spent the next 7 or so weeks at Rampton Secure Hospital. Consultant forensic psychiatrist Christopher Clark assessed Huntley and needed to decide whether he was competent to stand trial. By early October, Christopher was certain of 2 things. Huntley showed signs of being psychopathic, but he did not suffer from any major mental or psychotic illness that would prevent him from standing trial. He was moved to a segregation unit at Woodhill Prison in Milton Keynes. On June 9, 2003, while awaiting trial, Huntley attempted to take his life using antidepressants that he had hidden in his cell. Initially, there were genuine concerns that he may die as a result, but 2 days later, Huntley was back in his cell. At his preliminary hearing on June 16th, Huntley pleaded not guilty to the murder charges. He did plead guilty to what both he and Maxine were charged with, conspiracy to pervert the course of justice. Maxine pleaded not guilty to her charges of conspiracy to pervert the course of justice and assisting an offender. The trial of Ian Huntley began on November 5, 2003, at the Old Bailey, with Mr. Justice Alan Moses presiding over the case. Huntley maintained his not guilty plea with 2 counts of murder. Richard Latham was the Crown prosecution, and in his opening statement, he detailed what the prosecution believed happened to the girls on August 4th. By chance, they happened to pass Huntley's home while Maxine was away, and he chose to deliberately lure them inside at 6:37 p.m. Both girls were murdered shortly after the door behind them was closed. Richard Latham showed the court that Maxine had been in Grimsby that night by using eyewitness accounts and cell phone data. He explained that the degree of decomposition meant the coroner was unable to give a precise cause of death for either of the girls or determine whether they had been assaulted. Neither Jessica nor Holly showed signs of knife wounds, drugging, or comprehensive neck injuries that would consist of strangulation. Instead, they were most likely asphyxiated. The prosecution laid out its case over 3 days. During Huntley's best efforts to get rid of all the physical evidence tying him to the crime, he had been unsuccessful. There was enough forensic evidence that showed Holly and Jessica had been murdered in Huntley's home before being transported to that ditch in Suffolk within 12 hours of their death. Fiber from Huntley's vehicle, clothes, and carpets inside his home was matched to those found on the girls' shirts, which had been found burned in a bin at Huntley's workplace with his fingerprints on the bin. The prosecution had a rock-solid case, but Huntley's defense was going for a different angle. Huntley admitted that both girls died in his house that day, but alleged it had been accidental. On December 1st, he testified in his defense and was questioned by Stephen Coward, his defense counsel. Responding to questions posed by Stephen, Huntley claimed Holly and Jessica had come into his home to stop a nosebleed that Holly had suffered on the way home. While he was helping Holly in the bathroom, she slipped and fell, pushing her into the already run bath. Holly then drowned, and Huntley panicked and froze. After witnessing this, Jessica allegedly started screaming, telling Huntley that he had pushed Holly into the bath. While he was trying to stop her from screaming, Huntley claims he accidentally suffocated Jessica. He explained the reason he didn't help Holly from drowning was because his focus had been on getting Jessica to stop screaming. Huntley claimed his next memory was waking up on his landing near Jessica's body. Naturally, the question was posed about Huntley not calling emergency services to get help for the girls if this had been an accident. He explained he was too concerned whether the police or the public would believe what happened, hence why he tried to conceal them being in the house. As he cried on the stand, Huntley admitted he was responsible for their deaths, but continued to insist it had all been an accident. He also added that his behavior during questioning was not him feigning mental illness, but rather a reaction to the trauma of what he had done. On December 3rd, it was Maxine Carr's turn to testify for her own defense. She briefly explained her relationship with Huntley and what their plans for the future had been. Michael Hubbard, her defense counsel, then focused his questions on the days following the girl's death. Maxine explained that she came home on August 6th and found that Huntley had recently washed all their bedding and cleaned sections of the house. Her initial impression was that he had been covering up for a woman who had been in the house. Maxine also noticed a crack in the enamel bathtub, one that had not been there before her trip to Grimsby 4 days earlier. When Michael Hubbard asked why Maxine participated in the deep cleaning of the home, She responded that she was always obsessive about tidiness. The questions then turned to why Maxine had gone along with the false alibi. She claimed that Huntley had repeatedly assured her he was innocent of doing anything with the girls, and he feared being set up or having the crime pinned on him if the police uncovered a 1998 abuse allegation made against him in Grimsby. As for her speaking in the past tense about Holly, Maxine said she merely did this because she previously worked with the girls. Maxine claimed she repeatedly pleaded with Huntley to come clean to the investigators and tell them what had happened about Holly having a nosebleed and the girls coming into the house. He made up varying excuses as to why he couldn't do that. The final thing Maxine stated was that she would never have given a false alibi had she thought Huntley was guilty. If for a minute I had known or believed he murdered either of those girls, I would have been horrified. On December 10th, both the defense and prosecution gave their closing statements. Richard Latham referred to Ian Huntley and Maxine Carr as accomplished liars. He once again outlined their case against Huntley, pointing out all of the forensic and circumstantial evidence they had uncovered. We invite you to reject the accounts of both deaths being accidental as desperate lies, the only way out for him. Richard continued, whatever he initiated plainly went wrong. Therefore, in this ruthless man's mind, both girls had to die in his own selfish self-interest. Once the prosecution had their final word, Michael Coward had his say. He maintained that while Huntley had caused the girls' deaths, the prosecution could not prove that he had intended to do so. Therefore, Ian Huntley should be charged with manslaughter instead of murder. The jury spent 4 days deciding on verdicts for both Huntley and Maxine. On December 17, 2003, they returned a majority verdict. Ian Huntley was guilty of 2 counts of murder, which meant he was sentenced to life in prison. The minimum term was later imposed by High Court Judge Mr. Justice Moses, who decided that Huntley will spend no less than 40 years behind bars. He will be 68 years old before parole can even be considered, and Justice Moses made it clear that this order offers little or no hope of the defendant's eventual release. Maxine Carr pleaded guilty to her charge of perverting the course of justice, but not guilty to the charge of assisting an offender. The jury believed her claims that she only covered for Huntley because she believed he was innocent. For perverting the course of justice, Maxine was given a 3.5-year sentence. Following Huntley's conviction, Leslie Chapman spoke to reporters outside. I think he was a time bomb waiting to go off, and both our girls were in the wrong place at the wrong time, she said. I hope the next time I see him, it will be like we saw our daughters, and it will be in a coffin. Huntley made a comment to the media about his sentencing from prison, saying, I'm going to rot inside this place. I'll rot in here, I know it. I'll spend the rest of my life in here. I'm going to be inside forever, and it'll be torture. Huntley's time behind bars so far has not been smooth sailing. A crime as high profile as his, it is difficult to not have other prisoners find out that you were responsible for killing 2 young girls. In prison, this is frowned upon by even the most violent of offenders. On September 14, 2005, spree killer Mark Hobson, who killed 4 people in 2004, scalded Huntley with boiling water while they were both imprisoned in Wakefield. Following the incident, Huntley alleged that the prison authorities had failed to protect him and tried to claim £15,000 in compensation. On September 5, 2006, Ian Huntley attempted to take his life using antidepressants, like he had in 2003. He was hospitalized as a result, and a thorough search of his cell took place. It was then that prison guards found a cassette tape, which had some curious information. It was clear that Huntley intended for this to be his final message to the world after he had died. In the message, Huntley claimed he told Maxine Carr he murdered the girls and that he planned to confess prior to their arrests. Maxine, according to Huntley, then slapped him across the face and told him to pull himself together. She said she couldn't lose the teaching position she had been working so hard for. Huntley went on to say it had been Maxine who told him to burn the bodies and get rid of all forensic evidence that linked him to the crime. In a curious twist, it is believed that Huntley made a deal with a fellow prisoner where he would make his confession tape for the man to sell to the media in exchange for the antidepressants. In January 2008, Huntley was transferred from Wakefield to Franklin Prison. It was here, 2 years later, in March 2010, that Huntley was attacked again. This time, armed robber Damian Folks slashed Huntley's neck. The injuries he sustained required treatment in hospital, and Huntley again tried to claim compensation, now requesting £20,000. Maxine Carr was released on probation on May 14, 2004. She had served 21 months in prison. Due to the nature of her conviction and her involvement with Huntley, Maxine was given a secret identity to protect her from any members of the public who sought to do her harm. At the time, she was one of only 4 released prisoners who were given a new identity after being released in the UK. In February 2005, Maxine won an injunction that granted her lifelong anonymity. In the years since the crime, there has been much debate about Maxine's involvement. Some believe her account, while others think she knew what Huntley had done prior to her arrest. We will likely never know the truth about this. Once all was said and done, and Huntley was behind bars for good, the families of Holly and Jessica had to settle into their new normal. Kevin and Nicola, Holly's parents, later revealed their struggle to be part of the 5% of married couples who stay together following the murder of their child. For the first 5 months after Holly died, we broke down together. But after that, we processed our grief at different speeds, Kevin told the Evening Standard. It was one of almost 2 years before we found each other again, he continued. But grief gives you a different sense of the passage of time, and has slipped by unnoticed. Holly's brother, Oliver, grew up and started a family of his own with his wife, Lydia. Oliver has made sure to tell his 2 children about their Aunt Holly to keep her memory alive. Sharon Chapman, who worked at Jessica's school prior to her death, returned to work in the years that followed. Leslie Chapman was supposed to start his new engineering job on August 5th, the day after he last saw his little girl. He began his job months later. Sharon and Leslie have been largely private about their grief. What do you think of today's case? Share your thoughts in the comment section below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more captivating true crime stories. Until the next time, stay safe and keep your eyes peeled for the next mystery to unfold.